to do with your time. And why? I like there's totally people on YouTube to watch me. Okay. Sorry, for watching. And it would be the Beatis watching, so I'm sorry. What was I saying? Oh, so Francesca de Rimini says the same thing. Love is irresistible. We just couldn't stop. And she says the same thing though, but in a different way. The eternal ray kindles love. God's love makes you love. She says Paolo's love made her love. She says God's love makes you love, the right kind of love. And she says, if you have your priorities in order, this love is a sure guide. She says, if some other things seduce your love, my brother, it can only be a trace, misunderstood, of this glory, this love, God's love, that you see shining through the other. So, Francesca, it's like Paolo's amazing. Francesca, you were supposed to look through him, not at him, at what makes a human being amazing, God, right? He was the stab of joy for you. Beatrice was the stab of joy for Dante. I'm not saying don't love other human beings. Hopefully you know the sense in which I mean this. In a sense, Augustine would say, we shouldn't ever love a human being like we love God. Those of you who read Augustine's Confessions with me will remember he had a good friend that died of illness. And he was really, really upset. And he was looking back as an older man and writing about this. And of course, he's not saying don't love your friends. But he said, I should have known that any transient, impermanent thing that I give my heart to, it's not going to last. It's not a safe place for my heart because it will go away. We're all going to lose people, do you know? And of course, you're young and it seems very far in the future, and I'm older and it's not so far in the future anymore. Do you know what I mean? People are going to start disappearing, and I may be the one who disappears, If all of your being is wrapped up in this and then it's gone, you got to know that every love that somebody gives you, your parents, everybody, it's God through them, right? So she says, if something else seduces your love, you got to remember it was only a trace of the love that you see here in paradise. It was a signpost. It wasn't a you have arrived sign. It was a go this way sign. Okay. I feel like I'm very scattered around today. What do we got? Let me see what else I really want to talk about. We've got 20 minutes left. Mercury. Let's move on, because I feel like lovers of honor, this is pretty self-explanatory. Justinian mentions hierarchy again. So let me touch on that, and then we'll move on to Venus. Justinian says, this little star, Mercury, embellishes its crown with the light of those good spirits who were zealous in order to win honor and renown. And when desire leans to such things, being bent from the true good, the rays of the true love thrust upward with less force for the ascent. We don't go up as high because we were held down just slightly, like we're just slightly off. We're loving honor at least equally with God. But in the balance of our reward and due is part of our delight, because we see no shade of difference between the two, our reward and our delight. This is where we are. We're delighted with it. We're as full as we can be. By this, the true judge sweetens our will, so moving us that in all eternity nothing can twist our beings to any ill. Now, listen to this. Unequal voices make sweet tones down there on earth. Just so in our life, these unequal stations make a sweet harmony from sphere to sphere. Maybe. And, you know, not everybody sings the same note, probably. And it sounds better that way than if everybody just sang the melody and there were no harmony. If you have no, you know, you have a soprano but no alto and no bass, it's so obvious in something as simple as a choir that diversity of voice, diversity of station brings more glory. It's just the same. That having different stations, having different jobs gives us more glory. Somebody yesterday in class brought up you know, where Paul was saying some are, you know, pastors, teachers, some have gifts of healing, you know, gifts of knowledge, all the giftednesses. Did somebody here say that already here today? Okay, yeah. It makes it richer. So Justinian is fine with this and echoes this theme again, that we're all different. Okay, now we'll move to Venus. But remember, Venus is the end of the cone. The places where people are living under a shadow of, I want to say it's like a little crack in their bottle. Do you know what I mean? A little bit of a leak. But if it's like if it was no fault of the bottle, do you know what I mean? It was just made that way to have this little imperfection in it. I'm thinking of like a gemstone that's beautiful, but it has this little tiny flaw deep in it, but it's still beautiful, you know, but it just, it's the way it's made. It just has this little flaw. So Venus is the last place where we see that. And this is the amorous. Now I love, this is another cool thing that Dante did that's kind of hidden in the notes. Page 668. We meet one of the amorous. Did you remember? I think I asked this question. Who is the shining star of Venus? The amorous. Do you remember a lady? A lady. He gets pointed out anyway. I don't know that she gets to talk, but she's the first one who ever got to go there.
Oh, Rahab.
Rahab, who let the spies into Jericho and jumped ship on the Canaanites and joined the Israelites and gets to be in Jesus's genealogy. What? Yes, this is amazing. So Rahab, who is described as a harlot, as a prostitute. Apparently that was her day job. Presumably she gave that up after she joined the Israelites. So she's there. And he meets someone named Kunitsa, a lady named Kunitsa. She says, my name was Kunitsa of Romano, and I shine here because this star conquered me with its flame. I was driven just a little too much by love. Yet gladly I embrace the fate that so arranged my lot, and I rejoice in it, although it may seem hard to the crowd below. So she doesn't give us her backstory, but if we go back to Inferno, if we go back to the violent against their neighbors, what are they? They're in the boiling blood river, I think. Yes, the river of blood. Okay. We meet a guy on line 109. Here they pay for their ferocity. Here is Alexander and Dionysius, who brought long years of grief to Sicily. He's not the god Dionysius, he's a tyrant of Sicily. That brow you see with the hair as black as night is Azzolino. Azzolino is Kunitsa's brother. These are people like current events. They're people known. He's in the violent against neighbors. She's in paradise in the sphere of the amorous. And here's a note I wrote. I think I stole it from somebody. I don't think I made this up. Azzolino is her brother. This is an example of the previous canto's teaching, different destinies for different people. Also, he, Azzolino, used his ardor or zeal or wrath poorly. She repented and used hers rightly. They were both on fire for something. He chose poorly. and she chose well. Yes, in the previous canto, Dante inquires about why why everybody's not the same even in this world. What, why can't we all just be the same? And the guy he's talking to says uh, everything in paradise, but even in creation, goes exactly according to God's will. He said, the bow, whatever arrow takes its arc from this bow, flies to a determined end. From God's bow, it always shoots straight. Then he asked him this: would man be worse off than he is there on earth without a social order? Would we be better if everybody had the exact same job? Everybody's a doctor. Congratulations. Everybody's a doctor. No, it would be awful. There's nobody at the grocery store. There's no legal help. There's no judges. We have no president. How about if we're all the president? Let's all be president. Oh my goodness, no. And so this is enough for Dante to see, oh yes, different destinies. And I don't use that in a pagan way at all, like fate is, just different callings. And so this brother and sister had same parents, same family. One of them chose well, one of them chose poorly, but they had the same raw materials, if you know what I mean. Like I give you guys all a lump of clay. Everybody gets a lump of clay, and I say, make something. Are you all going to make the same thing? No. Are you all going to make something equally good? No. And mine is going to be the worst. No. I did take a pottery class, and you have not seen my productions. So before we say, okay, he moves on to the sphere of the sun, and let's wrap up here. What has the sun been this whole poem? What has the sun stood for? So on Purgatory, it says Virgil goes up to the next legend. He always follows the sun, and you can't climb without the sun. Well, it's a guide, but who is our ultimate guide? God. So it's like God's illumination, right? So they can't make progress in purging sin without God's illumination. They always, if they follow the sun, at the very beginning, when he's lost in the dark wood, and he says he sees the sun rising on that mountain that he'd like to go to. It's Mount Purgatory, but he can't get there because those animals, sin. And then when he arrives at Purgatory, it's a sunrise again, like the sun's arising. Well, now it's just sun 24/7 in paradise. There's no night. Do you notice that? Yes. It was always dark in Inferno. Purgatory has day and night. It's always day in paradise. It says, I love that in Revelation, and there was no sun. They had no need of the sun anymore because the Lord was their light. So this is where he's headed, the sun. And in the sun, we meet the doctors of the church, people who were intellectually or spiritually illuminated by God. Yes. So there was actually like a doctoral program, although it involved like even more years than study today. It involves getting a doctorate, but also it could just be awesome people that wrote amazing things. And here's the interesting thing about the doctors of the church. We find two main guys praised. Do you remember who they are? Oh. St. Francis and St. Dominic. He meets, first of all, Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas was a famous Dominican. And Thomas Aquinas gives a speech, and he says, yeah, the Franciscans are awesome. I love St. Francis. Dude, you're Dominican. I love St. Francis, but he said, you know what? Those Dominicans, they're getting really lax. They stink now. Like once upon a time they were all right, but they stink. Like, okay. And then another guy gets up. His name's Bonaventure. He's a Franciscan. And he says, oh, Dominic's so awesome. But those Franciscans, they're losing it. They praise the other, but blame their own. remember how the people behave in hell? Do you remember? It's like, oh, you want to know about him? I'll tell you. I'll dish his dirt. Yeah, this is what he did. He's a big fat jerk. And while I gnaw on this guy's brains, I'm going to tell you all the bad things he did. And they just out each other constantly, right? And then in purgatory, they're a little more polite. It's like, oh, this. Let me introduce you to my friend here. But in paradise, they all rush to Dante. So he shows up, on Venus or whatever. Well, sun. We'll do the sun. And they just, all the souls, like, ooh, it's a visitor. Oh, and one of them somewhere says something like, oh, here is a soul that will increase our loves. Hey, we're so happy you're here. This is their response. So they never out other people, but they're so eager to tell anything Dante wants. They're just like, what can we do for you, Dante? What would you like to know? Oh, don't worry. You don't need to tell me what you want to know, because I see the mind of God, and I can see your mind in the mind of God, so you don't have to tell me. I'll just tell you. You don't even have to ask. Yeah, Rhett. Oh, I have no idea. I don't even want to know. I don't even want to know. I I don't care. If you guys can watch it when you miss, I don't care. Yeah. So the courtesy that you praise your rival, but you find fault with your own. You don't find fault with your rival. But it's like Thomas, Francis and Dominic are the epitome of what we've been talking about the whole morning. If you know anything, some of you were in my junior high class and we did the Middle Ages. You know anything about, well, we read the, no, that's Benedict, never mind. Confusing Benedict and Francis. St. Francis felt a calling to just embrace poverty and walk around barefoot in rags. And if you gave him anything, he'd just give it away. Don't bother to think he's going to keep it. He's just going to give it to the next person he sees. And he preaches to birds, and he goes to the Holy Land to try to convert the Muslims, but that doesn't work out. And he says, this whole book learning thing, don't love it. Don't love it. I feel like we should just be out there loving people. I love the birds. I love the sun. I love the wind. We just love everything. And we just go and preach love and harmony and peace, and we give away all of our possessions. And great. And they start the Order of the Franciscans. Then Dominic comes along in the same lifetime, in the same time period. Dom's like, we got heretics left, right, and center here. What the church needs is some good book learning. We need people trained to combat heresy. We need people well educated to go out there and preach. We need better preachers. And it's like, let's just go preach to birds and love. And I'm like, so solve the problems and refute the heresies. And the thing is, they're both right. Some of you, when you were young, when I do that Middle Ages year for the junior high, I always ask them which one is better. It's a trick question. None. There's no right answer. Like, Dominic did what he was asked to do, and Francis did what he was asked to do. And they both started these orders that were amazing. But they were so different. But they had different callings. But both of them had started groups that went downhill, as often happens with groups that start, Anyway, I think that's the main thing to get out of that section on the sun, that the courtesy and the love between people with different callings. And this is not what we have here. I'll just speak for myself, that I tend to be, like I said earlier, jealous of those with a different calling. C.S. Lewis, in that same Out of the Silent Planet book that I've mentioned several times, he meets the creatures on another planet, and they said, vanilla ice cream. I wanted the chocolate ice cream. It's like, eat the vanilla ice cream. It's ice cream. That's a very minor example. But things in life are bigger than ice cream. There are things in life bigger than ice cream, unbelievably. And we reject the good we've been given because it wasn't the good we wanted. And like, you're 2 years old, we've all seen it. I didn't want that toy. He's got the other toy. I want that toy. I'm just not gonna play. It's not gonna play anymore. They do it, right? But adults do it. Adults do it. They just don't do it so out of. I wanted that one. I'm not going to talk to him anymore. So, yes, Ethan and then Kyle.
That's think about it. I mean, we tend to we're really divided on theology, history, a lot of that. But in the end, as long as you're not spitting out heresy, it's just a different calling, and it's where God wants you now. And maybe that calling is meant to lead others to Christ, and to just grow in sanctification.
And I will go so far as to say that Dominic had tried to be Francis. I don't think he would have made a very good job of it. Do you know what I mean? Like he wasn't cut out for that. And I don't think Francis would have made any sort of Dominic. When you try to be the other person, when you want their good, it just doesn't work out. What did you want to say, Kyle?
So, going back to the day and nights
Mhm.
of hell and heaven, does that mean that God isn't in hell, or I
Well, God's light doesn't shine in hell.
God's light doesn't shine in hell, but like, is God in control of hell, or does God is it God in control of hell, or is it Satan in control of hell?
I believe that in the story, okay, because I'm not. We went there once, and also we only have 2 minutes, so I'm not gonna. But in the story, we see that when the guards of the gate of Dis won't let Dante and Virgil through, a heavenly messenger is sent, and he's the guy that just goes and he opens the door, and then he's like, "Oh, you jerks," and then he just waves the smoke out of his face and he walks away. So God had the power to send a messenger in the story to plop open the door and say, "Knock it off," and then leave. So in that realm, he does. It certainly, the fact that it's sunless is partly because they're underground, but partly it is symbolic that God's not revealing himself continually to them and guiding them. They're set. They're in a place. That's the best answer I can give you in the story. You guys can have another lunchtime discussion on God's presence in hell. I want to wrap up with one thing that I got this out of another book. This is not me, but I wanted to share it because I thought it was really cool. At the beginning of the Inferno, very beginning of the poem, Virgil says, "Yeah, I know you want to get to that mountain. You can't get there from here. You have to go the long way. We're going to take you through the underworld." And he said, "Fine, there are characters and people in history that have experienced this, but I am not Aeneas, and I am not Paul." Aeneas, who famously went to the underworld, and in a sense, he went to heaven, the Elysian fields, where his dad Anchises was, and visited with him. Paul, who we're told he said, "I know a man who was caught up to the third heaven and saw inexpressible wonders," and we're pretty sure he's talking about himself. This is in 2 Corinthians 12. If you want to look up 2 Corinthians 12. And when he says, "I know a man," but then he gives a detailed description of the man, and that he saw inexpressible wonders that he can't communicate. Paul went through some extensive training after his conversion. He spent several years, in study before he launched his missionary activities. And this happened to him, that God was revealed to him in some way. So here's what I wrote down in this other book. I am not Aeneas. I am not Paul. But like Aeneas, Dante has learned true piety. Aeneas was known as Pious Aeneas. Pious because he did his duty. If you guys remember from the Aeneid last year. Dante's duty is to go where God is, and Dante's duty is to conform his will with God's will. Like Paul, he has discovered the nature of love. Paul, the author of the famous 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter, that people memorize, he's ordered his loves correctly, the way Paul talked about. Aeneas traveled to go to a home he didn't know in Italy. Dante is going to his true home that he's never really been to before. Aeneas went to the heaven of the Elysian fields. Dante's going to heaven. And like I said, Paul was caught up into third heaven, whatever that means. I don't know. It's another instance of, he drops Aeneas and Paul. He name drops at the beginning, but Dante is becoming those characters. He is experiencing what they experienced, and he is growing through it like they grew. Okay, I fixed yours. Yesterday I emailed the wrong cantos. Read cantos 13 through 22. Do the very short Dickens Great Expectations imitation, and we only have 2 more weeks. I'll see you next week. Thank you, guys. And look through the story and illustrations if you want to.
I'll just keep doing the next one. Until you're